So here we'll introduce the topic of carrying capacity and the amount of people the Earth is able to hold. The Earth is currently at 6.9 billion people, and it is believed to breach its carrying capacity in the next couple years if it has not already. So carrying capacity is essentially how many organisms of a specific species an environment can hold. So we can think of this like an acre of land. An acre of land could support one or two cows indefinitely. There'd be enough grass for those cows to eat. However, an acre of land can't support 100 cows. There would be too many cows and not enough grass to support the food requirements of 100 cows. So carrying capacity is the maximum amount that an environment can hold of a given species, and the disclaimer to this is that is without change to that environment. If you change the environment, that impacts the number of species it could hold. So for example, our acre, maybe its carrying capacity is 20 cows. The acre of land is able to support the food needs of 20 cows indefinitely. However, if half of that acre gets burnt by wildfire, then it's not going to be able to carry as many cows. Currently in our world, 1 in 4 people live in what's known as extreme poverty. They are not able to meet their basic needs for food, clothing, shelter, and health. They have no medical resources. They are wearing the shirts on their backs that they've worn for days, months, if not years, and they're scrounging to put food in their mouths. These people make less than $2 a day. And I like to point out that $730 a year, my oil to heat for the winter costs more than that. I could support a person living in poverty annually with what I pay for oil in the United States. This is a difficult situation for these people to break out of because there's just not enough resources to go around in their countries. Now keep in mind that poverty that we're familiar with in the United States is nothing compared to the poverty as it occurs throughout the world. In the United States, we see people who are homeless, maybe begging on the street corner for change, and we view that as poverty. That really is not a impoverished lifestyle as the world knows it. That man on the corner begging for change certainly makes more than $2 a day. So just to put things in perspective. Now, here we're going to talk about the gap between the rich and the poor, and you can clearly see how between a highly developed country and a less developed country, what the difference in the quality of life is. Here in highly developed nations, we have, modern luxuries, television, books, computers, carpets on our floor, comfortable lifestyles. Whereas in less developed nations, dirt floors, brick walls, the majority of their stuff looks pretty dirty. So the cleanliness, the food resources, the clothing, and these are people who live you can see the clothes that they're wearing are more or less clean, and they actually have a home, and they actually have food. So in these countries, this picture represents a family that's making ends meet. This family might be making ends meet, but this is in the United States, and this is in the less developed countries. Make sure you know these definitions. And then we're going to talk about the ecological footprint. So I'm going to skip ahead to there. So here we start to talk about the global ecological overshoot, that the world doesn't have enough resources to go around to support its population. So you can see here kind of the offset between highly developed and less developed nations and the amount of space they need to support their quality of life. when we're talking about how many hectares per person, that's the amount of space a person needs to provide them with enough food, clothing, and shelter to support their quality of life. If we were to bring the population of India, if just their children, one U.S. child has the environmental impact of 12 children in a less developed country like India. If we were to bring the population of only the country of India up to the quality of life that the United States experiences, it would require 4 additional Earths to support their needs. So we are trying to help countries develop in a sustainable way. That doesn't necessarily mean that that is how the United States developed, or other highly developed nations, but we are trying to impose these practices on other countries so that there are enough resources in the future. So here is the definition of what an ecological footprint is. This is the amount of land, water, and ocean required to provide a person with the resources that they consume. Now keep in mind that, like with these charts, the resources that the United States consumes in comparison to other countries is grossly disproportionate. So our footprint is larger than other countries because we're using more resources. So here's where you can see how many hectares the world has available. That number divided by the population of the Earth provides 1.8 hectares per person. However, the current average global ecological footprint is 2.7, almost a whole number value greater than what is available. So we are currently living in an ecological deficit. How we're able to provide for that deficit is through technological advancements. Now, the United States using more resources than they need to survive, essentially, is what's known as consumption overpopulation. So there's 2 different types of overpopulation. There are people overpopulation and consumption overpopulation. People overpopulation degrades the environment because there is not enough food and resources within the country's borders to provide enough for their people to live comfortably. And what ends up happening is there's degradation to the environment through unsafe water practices, poor disposal of sewage, the inhabitants drinking contaminated water. There's simply just not being enough industry to produce textiles, clothing, shoes, building products to support their population, having to use more trees and woods and agricultural lands to provide for the population. This leads to degradation of the environment. A really good example of how we deplete a resource to the point where it's unhealthy for the environment is in the case of aquifers. So in desert regions across the United States where populations have developed, they pump water out of the aquifers, which are water stored in the ground, and they use it to irrigate for agriculture. These areas have been moving the water out of the ground so quickly that their aquifers are getting depleted to a point where they're running short on their water supply, and they're not going to be able to provide enough water for their inhabitants in the future if the rates don't taper off. Now, that's people overpopulation. Consumption overpopulation is a perfect example of the United States and other highly developed nations where people consume too much in the way of resources than they need to survive. And so this is like more than their fair share. And this leads to degradation of the environment. And in essence, you can think of it like pollution. So we have a tremendous amount of industry in the United States. Some families have more than one vehicle. We have more clothes than we need. We have more large homes. We have materials, lots of furniture, technology, computers, phones, you name it. We have all kinds of stuff. And it requires different industrial companies to produce these items. And in the United States, we have tried to get a handle on our pollution. We are working towards that, but mass production of resources leads to significant amount of pollution. Not only that, but garbage disposal. We have landfills across the United States that are soon to be full. For a very long time, we put our garbage on barges and just sent that out into the ocean to sink. Burning garbage puts particulate matter and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So all of these things are a direct result of consumption over population that leads to a deterioration of the environment.